The city of Rome is located halfway down Italy's western peninsula, which made it easy because of its somewhat central location, made it easier for Rome to become the chief of all of Italy. Geography played a big role because, yes, it's true that there are mountains in Italy, but the mountains are nothing to compare with the rugged Greek mountains. They're nice, smooth mountains that would not destroy an army that tries to cross them. The land is much more fertile. Italy is bigger than Greece. The land is a lot more fertile, which made for people who are more prosperous. The city of Rome itself has been called by several names. One of them is the Eternal City. Another name is the City of Seven Hills. And yes, it is still sitting on 7 hills, has been from the time it was founded. Eternal City, a city that supposedly is going to last indefinitely. It's also located 50 miles from the sea along the banks of the Tiber River. Now, all these ancient cities, practically, with the exception of Jerusalem, but almost all these cities are located along the banks of a big river. The purpose of putting it 50 miles inland is believed to have been to protect from tidal waves. They are believed to have had some really, really huge tidal waves back then that don't go on as much now. This area is somewhat unstable. I mean, the city of Pompeii erupted in a volcano. But anyway, they'd have tidal waves, but they would never get 50 miles inland. Also, being 50 miles inland, it would protect them from pirates. The Mediterranean was infested with pirates, and eventually the Roman government was able to go in with its navy and clear out pirate nests. But no pirate ship would venture up a river 50 miles because they ran a risk of being sealed off with no place to run. Pirates are basically cowardly people. They'll prey on you when they think they can win, but when they see an enemy who's as big as they are, they'll turn and run pretty fast. So anyway, it was 50 miles inland. There's an old story that the city of Rome was founded by 2 twin brothers named Romulus and Remus. Now, folk, nearby here is a city called Rome, Georgia. And in that city, you'll see a bronze, I believe it's a bronze statue of a she-wolf who is nursing 2 young boys, 2 babies. According to the story, Romulus and Remus were cast out of home exposed, is what I call it, exposed by their parents, and left to die, left to starve to death to the elements. This was a common practice in the ancient world. And some wolves adopted them. Now, this has been proven. At least 50 documented cases where that wolves have adopted a human. And in the case of in American folklore, the story of Pecos Bill was adopted by wolves and reared up for several years. Anyway, this is not an impossible story. But anyway, the 2 boys grew up. Romulus killed Remus and founded the city of Rome. The traditional date was 753 BCE. Now, I'm not going to write that date down because it's a date that cannot be proven, but the Romans always said we were founded as the date, by our calendar, would be 753 BCE. They spoke Latin. The language is now dead except for use in some religious services, but otherwise doctors in our country and pharmacists used to use it, but it's since fallen into disuse. They spoke Latin. Now, the Romans historians said that they were originally governed by 7 kings. This was believed to be true history until a historian in the 1700s, Gibbon, questioned that and said that he didn't believe those kings even ever existed. Today we know that at least the last 3 of them probably did, and the last 3 were probably Etruscan. The Etruscans are a mystery people, ones we don't know a lot about, except they seem to have been highly civilized. But they moved in, ruled over Rome for a while. Whether they conquered Rome or just ruled over it or not, we don't know, but they ruled for a while. They set up temples, built bridges, built theaters, made all kinds of building structures, and appear to have been a highly developed, highly advanced people. And somewhere along the way, they declined and decayed and died out. And again, it's a mystery as to where they came from, who they were, and why they decayed and died out. This is something that we have to contend with throughout our history. What happened to some of these original people, the Minoans, the original inhabitants of India, the Dravidians, what happened to them, who they were, why they seem to be so advanced. But anyway, the Etruscans, same thing, very advanced perhaps, but who disappeared. Then Rome came in and set itself up as a republic. Now, Plato would have been proud. The word republic is close to democracy, but it meant that not everybody was, they never became a true democracy. Only a few people could attend the government meetings, only a few people could vote. So that's what the word republic means, where you pick a select group of people and they run your country. The Romans set up a system of government where they had consuls, but the main word you want to remember from this is the word Senate. Now, a whole lot of what the Romans did, we have copied. Almost every state capital and our national capital has a dome. The Romans put their capitals under domes. The Romans had an organization called a Senate, and almost every state in our union now has a Senate. Not to mention the federal government also has a Senate. To become a senator is like almost the next tie up to being president, and a lot of our senators have gone on to become president. Again, the Romans had a Senate. The Senate consisted of men from the upper classes, the aristocracy. Most of the time, the ordinary persons didn't have a chance. Now, there became a class struggle where you had your two groups of people, your patricians and your plebeians. And these groups struggled with each other for a few hundred years. Your patricians, the rich, the plebeians, generally the poor. However, in time of war, the patricians began to realize, hey, we need the plebeians. There's just not enough of us. The rich were too few in number. And they eventually called on the services of the plebeians. The plebeians were eventually allowed to set up two people called tribunes. And these tribunes had veto power.
See the patricians or the plebeians?
The plebeians set up the tribune. They set the tribunes in. In other words, the tribunes were allowed into the Senate, into the government meeting, as tribunes. They came from the poor people, but there were two of them. In other words, the Romans, when they set the consuls, they set up two. The Romans got to where, during the time of the Republic, they never allowed an office to have just one person. It was always two. Again, they were trying hard to avoid the trap of a rule by one man. Well, guess what? They fell back into it. Yes?
I actually have a regular question about the tests.
Okay, go ahead. It's office. Okay.
I was curious, like, if we did do the practice questions in the back of the chapter, would that help a lot? Like,
I don't use them. I mean, probably, I don't know how, because I haven't looked at them in years. I'm sorry, I should know, but I don't use them.
does anybody in this class do that?
Okay.
No?
One's online.
Yeah, online.
I don't go online either, so I make them up myself. So whether it'll help you or not, I don't know.
Yeah, he said just to, like, use the video.
It wouldn't hurt. I mean, it wouldn't hurt. All right, anyway, leaving that, we're running short on time. The tribunes had veto power, which meant if they didn't like, they could not make laws. The patricians would not ratify, but if they didn't like laws, the patricians passed, they'd say, I forbid it. To this day, we have that same thing in our government, veto power. Again, we have a Senate, we have a president who has veto power, but they would not put power in the hands of one person. All right. eventually, Rome conquered all of Italy. The way they did it, they defeat a city-state in battle. Then they tell that city-state, hey, become our ally. Your daughters can marry our sons can marry your daughter, and we'll build a road from our city to yours. And the Roman roads were like nothing that had been seen before that time. They laid a foundation. Then they put blocks on top of the solid foundation. And that way they could get a cart, and they could haul fairly heavy loads fairly quickly. And the roads, I mean, the carts would not sink down in the mud. And some of these roads that the Romans built, believe it or not, are still in use to this day, even in this time of our modern automobiles. Yes.
Were they the cobblestone roads that they talk about?
A lot of well, the picture. You have a picture of the Roman roads on page. If I can find it really fast.
127.
What's that?
127.
127, and they're not really what you call cobblestone. 127, an ancient road and a modern road. No, the cobblestone roads. You see a lot of those in Latin America, but cobblestone is not great for hauling carts with. You really want something more like a flat stone road. But they built a city. Oh, by the way, speaking of marriages, eventually patricians were allowed to marry plebeians, and plebeians allowed to marry patricians. A practice has been forbidden at first, and it might be one of the things that saved the Roman upper class, because if they kept marrying each other, the problems we talked about earlier might have hit them. But they eventually allowed their upper classes to marry into lower class families and vice versa. And then a lot of the conflict between the two classes ended when this law was passed. Anyway, the Romans would conquer a city, get it on their side, and then go conquer another city, get it on their side, build a road, and there came a saying, all roads lead to Rome, which was largely true. The Romans would build a road from their town to the cities they conquered, offered to open up trade. And these people were easy to assimilate because they had the same language, the same religion, and eventually Rome became the mistress of all of Italy. All right. Time went on, and Rome had to fight 3 wars with a neighbor they could not placate. While Rome was building up right here on the Mediterranean, to this peninsula, there was a city called Carthage. Carthage built up a fairly large empire. And inevitably, these two empires are going to clash. Carthage claimed it controlled Sicily. Rome sent its army in to take Sicily. These wars are called the Punic Wars. Punic Wars, there were 3 of them. They lasted about 100 years. Actually, all 3 together. And there were periods of peace in between. The first Punic War was a defeat for the Carthaginians, a victory for Rome, and Rome got Sicily. Now, Carthage would not give up. Carthage took over a lot of Spain, and it led to the Second Punic War. The Second Punic War featured a man named Hannibal. Hannibal was able to cross the Alps with a bunch of elephants and come down into Italy. And for 20 years he ravaged Italy, and he managed to avoid a big clash, except for one in the battle where he pretty well believed he could win, and he did. Essentially, after the Battle of Punic, with his big clash with the Romans, he told his center, the center of the line, just back up, pretend you're beaten and back up. So while the center was backing up, the Romans would advance. I mean, to make a long story short, here's what happened. The center of the Roman army, the center of the Hannibal's army backed up, and then the Romans advanced, not realizing they were being closed in. Eventually, Hannibal's men closed in, surrounded the Romans, and of course in those days, if you get around the Romans, if you get around the enemy flank, you could whip them. These people only wore armor on their front. They had nothing to protect their backs. If you get around their back, and then Hannibal figured out, let the center pull back, let the center pull back, and the enemy will advance on you, and you can enclose him. Well, eventually a Roman general named Scipio decided, hey, enough of this. He went to Carthage itself, engaged the Carthage army right at the capital city. Hannibal was forced to leave Italy, went to Carthage, but there he was defeated. His elephant charge did not work. His other tactics did not work. The Romans knew it too well. And the Second Punic War then went to Rome also. Now, yes, the Romans tried to placate the Carthage. The Romans tried to assimilate them. There are some people you can't placate, you can't assimilate. Carthage came back, even though at this time they were hopelessly outnumbered, hopelessly, you might say, outweaponed. They tried again. This time the Romans took care of them. They plowed up their city, burned it with fire, plowed it up with salt. I mean, put salt in the ground and plowed it till it would never produce again. Took the inhabitants and sold them all as slaves. Scattered them out. Eventually Carthage rebuilt, but not by its original inhabitants. The point I'm making, folk, is the American Indians fought for about 400 years, but when they saw they couldn't win, they eventually quit fighting. The Japanese fought hard in World War II, but when they saw they couldn't win, they quit fighting. The Confederate States fought really well in the Civil War, but when they saw they couldn't win, they surrendered, they quit fighting. The people of Carthage would not quit fighting. There was nothing Rome could do but utterly destroy the city, carry off their inhabitants, and scatter them all over the empire as slaves. There are some people who will not stop fighting. How do you handle them? In our modern political correctness, we have no way of handling them. We don't know. People who will fight you for years and generations and hundreds of years and hundreds of generations and never ever quit. I have more to say about that later, believe me. Anyway, Rome defeated Carthage, and when Carthage fell, so did the western part of the Mediterranean world fall also. Now, Rome did not yet have France, but Rome had Spain and what is today Portugal. They had much of North Africa, and they had all of Italy, and these islands here in the western part of the Mediterranean. Then came the end of the Roman Republic. Now, Rome, as I've already mentioned, were determined that whatever happened, they were not going to go back to rule by one man. But eventually, that's what happened to them. The Republic fell, and it took 100 years. I mean, you're talking about 100 years. Several things went wrong. Number one, at first, when the wars occurred, the men would come back from the wars after a few weeks away from home and resume where they left off. Then came the Punic Wars, where the men would be gone for years. And they'd come back and find their wives that had to sell their farms to a rich neighbor, and they had no means of livelihood. Your poor people went out of business, your rich people took over, and this led to, again, it led to a class of Romans who were simply broke, with no land, no capital to start with, and no way to start over. Some of them were broken physically and mentally by the wars. And that's what we'll take up next time with two men, the two brothers called the Gracchus brothers. And where this leads to is a collapsed republic. Now, believe me, for all the discussion we had, which